What am I missing here? Yes. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Next up, we're switching back to our academia focus. We have Dr. Carolina Quintana, who is here with us. Dr. Quintana joined the faculty in the Department of Physical Therapy, Rehabilitation Sciences, and Athletic Training in the summer of 2022 as a clinical assistant professor. Her responsibilities include teaching courses within the athletic training program and department. And she is here to talk with us about writing a teaching statement. Good?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for having me. I know it's after lunch, so I'm going to try to make this a little bit interesting. A little more interesting perhaps than it could have been. I have also been through a final and a practical today. So if I'm a little bit woozy, it's my final day. But I wanted to start with something that I like to use in the classroom just to kind of get us all like moving and grooving, and I'll make sure I'm sharing with the online crew. With let me scroll back. What is your experience with teaching statements? So if you can log on to www.menti.com, and I'll give you a code that should have been showing up here, but it's not. When you're ready, www.menti.com. Oops, this is touchscreen. And then the code, let me just do this. We're playing games and yay. Okay. So menti.com, and then here is the code. This number right up there. You didn't know there would also be a vision test, but if you need me to read it out loud, let me know. And what is your experience with teaching statements? This is the way to see who's better equipped to come up here and take it away. Oh, no experience. I love it. Had to write a teaching philosophy for a class. Didn't know where to start. I've never written one. Okay, awesome. Now I'm going to switch over. Hopefully people got a chance to put in your answer. Sorry if you did not. I'll wait a little longer next time. What has been your biggest hurdle with teaching in general or writing a teaching statement? Both are fair game. Was never taught anything about how to teach. Okay. Limited teaching experience. Writing teaching is harder. Never done formal teaching. Just mentoring summer students. Always made too many slides for class time. That's I can feel that. Okay, in terms of writing a teaching statement, I don't know how to tackle that because I've only taught high school. I would not say you have only taught high school. I would say that you have survived and thrived teaching high school. Okay, limited teaching experience. The final question is, what is your most memorable teaching moment or your biggest win? Like, what makes you excited about teaching, or is there a moment you can look back on? It's a little self-reflection for this Thursday. And I haven't gotten anything in the chat, so hopefully Zoom folks are still able to participate. Okay. Watch the light bulb go off in office hours after explaining the topic again. Student didn't understand something the professor taught, but being the TA, I explained in a way different, and their joy when they finally understood was awesome to witness. That's awesome. The best part is seeing when students are able to pull things all together, when students grasp what the point was, seeing students realize they have learned. The student understands what I've taught and becomes excited about the topic. Awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna ask a question that is not, you can keep going if you're typing. Um, it's not showing up. Try to yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I just got done teaching pathophysiology, and so nobody was with me, but like, yes, that's a good moment. Tough semester. But the dreaded question that is not a Mentimeter question is, how many of you are looking to go into academia? Okay. So, okay, we're among, I was afraid there's the big industry wave, and I'm all for it. But for today, I'm really glad you're sticking it out here. So, just again, thanks for having me today. Oh, share. Yep. Thank you. My greatest teaching moment is when I go a whole day without somebody having to ask me to open the Blackboard or share the screen or something else. So thank you, Becca. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is a teaching statement, talk about the structure and elements of a teaching statement, your tips for writing a teaching statement, and then do a little bit of self-reflection, more self-reflection and some writing prompts, talk about a conclusion, and then time for any questions. And what we did earlier with kind of that anonymous little self-reflection breakout time, icebreaker time, I guess, is just, I want you to keep those thoughts with you as we go through, because I saw one of the comments said that somebody didn't feel like they had enough to write about, or maybe you haven't been taught how to do it. But we are all teachers by nature, like that's part of being human, and then we're here, so it adds to that. And so I really want to draw on that for these teaching statements. I will also state, I have been at a teaching institution, I've been a research institution, I've taught in different types of programs. I have a master's in education. So like the philosophy part is there, and I'm going to try to stay away from that because we're really kind of more objective today. But I've also served, for better or for worse, on multiple hiring committees. So the advice that I'm giving from you or to you is just my opinion first and foremost, but also it's the culmination of what I've seen and what I've experienced being on the job market. Just a little bit about me. I love The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So if you are looking to get into academia and you have not read that in teaching, liberating education consists in acts of cognition, not transferals of information. So today, hopefully I'm not just transferring information, but getting you thinking and drawing you into some of these ideas. So what is a teaching statement? It's a brief essay, 1 to 2 pages, and it really talks about your approach in the classroom, how you approach skills that your students should learn or have to learn. I'm in accredited programs in clinical education, and so we are told what we have to teach. And a lot of times that's a hurdle to how we can teach it. So being able to display how you do that. Who are you in the classroom? Like, what do you bring to the classroom? What works for you? What doesn't? And then finally, what you have taught and how. So that's not just like the concepts or the objectives, but what classes. Sometimes when you're on the academic job market, there's going to be certain classes they're looking for. So if you see that, being able to hone in to those classes and display kind of how you've taught those. It may include a teaching philosophy. I know somebody said they had to write a teaching philosophy for a previous class, and those talk more about like what type of teaching theories you use in the classroom. And it's a little bit more than what, it's a lot more than what a search committee is going to be looking for. And it doesn't get at the root of what you do in the classroom and what actually works. again, it's part of an academic job application process. It's one part of multiple pieces. How many of you are applying for jobs in this moment? Yeah. Okay. So how much are you asked to write? It's a lot, right? So I think one job application I've been looking at recently, like I was on higher ed jobs and it said a teaching statement, a diversity statement, a research statement, and each one had some different piece that they wanted included within that. So in your teaching statement, they wanted you to talk about inclusion. In your research statement, they wanted you to talk about your potential for grant funding, but that's on top of what you already are presenting. So sticking to that 1 to 2 pages is going to be, we'll touch on that in a little bit. So your goals of a teaching statement are to demonstrate to the hiring committee why you're going to be a benefit to them in the classroom, right? So tell them what you would bring to the department, not just courses you've taught, but what if there's a course that you created, some sort of experience you have matching standards to a course that you've been teaching. Any sort of technology is huge, especially post 2020 world. Technology is, if you aren't there, I mean, I remember when we all shut down, there were some professors who just did not know how to use technology. And so their classes during COVID were like activity worksheets and the students had to mail it back, and it wasn't, yeah, it wasn't it wasn't awesome. There was like pickups of like handouts, and it just, unfortunately, I mean, it's creating this gap, but it didn't work. And so if you have ever used a Canvas or a Blackboard, making sure that you mention that, and any pedagogical strategies you use. And then finally, your teaching effectiveness. And that, how I measure effectiveness is what students say, or their feedback, which would be the same, but like what they say in evaluations, or what their grades look like, or trends as the class goes. You also want to be able to show self-reflection and an evolution of teaching so that you're able to adapt to what is most pressing at the moment, or adapt to different courses, that you have been able to create strategies or an approach that is adaptable. I'll tell you, I have been at 2 different institutions and I haven't taught the same thing twice at each. So being able to be flexible within your field is important. So you start with the introduction, and the really big thing here is grabbing the reader's attention. With search committees, I hate to admit this, but when you see something that is just like it's dense writing on the page, and there's a lot of it, and then there's 3 of them for each person, and then you have at least 10 people applying for the position. If it's not interesting, they're not making it past that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But making sure you're really grabbing their attention from the start, introducing your experience, your goals, maybe a little bit of your philosophy, and introducing, it's like the elements of a 5-paragraph essay, right? Those next 3 paragraphs are going to be teaching strategies and examples. We'll kind of go back to this, but finally, your conclusion. This is where you can really talk about the job that you're applying for. And so it's almost like if you left this as the most modifiable part, you could add in, if they mention like, here, I knew that they were looking for somebody that was in orthopedics. So talk about specifically like these strategies, teaching ortho would look like this, or this is how I envision this, or bring it back to if you know that they have a great resource on campus. We have the Center for Teaching and Learning at KU. So, you know, I would love to use the Center of Teaching and Learning to grow X, Y, and Z. Just shows that you've done a little bit of homework about what they have, and maybe some excitement about the opportunity. Okay, I'm going to go into a list of tips that I have based on reading these. And if you have any thoughts, like throw it out. So stick to 1 to 2 pages, or the length in the post. I read this quote and it said, if they say they want 1 to 2 pages, don't give them 5 pages. This is not, I mean, if you've ever graded anything, you know that when the student submits more, it's not the fun time. Unless it's really great and you feel really confident, don't go over the limit. Usually I like to stick to a page You also want to avoid restating information that is included in your other documents. So they've seen your CV. This is a time to build on that. It's not a time to talk about your research. Maybe there's some research, some of your diversity statement, but it has to be applicable to teaching. So make sure each of those are independent but connected. Then there's the idea of show versus telling how you teach. So you want to really support and illustrate the claims you've made in your cover letter. So if you say that you know technology, tell them how you use technology in the classroom. Okay. You use Mentimeter, or you use clickers, or you use something to check in with students and tell them how, then provide feedback about how that went. Has anybody heard of the professors in the book or the blog? Okay, so Karen Kelsky wrote The Professor Is In, and this is straight from her book, but it's called The Essential Guide to Turning Your PhD into a Job. It's from 2015, so things are a little different, but it's a nice guide. So that's what I'm pulling this from. But she talks about what she calls a wide general good. So you have this good thing that you do, this good teaching thing. And then how did you get that? How did the strategies manifest this good? And then examples from specific classes, evidence that the strategies were effective. So students, scored this, or students reported back that they felt confident with this, and then wrap it up. And that concludes that paragraph. So if you think about each paragraph being one general good, tell them about how that happened. Less storytelling. Then you want to consider your audience. What is the makeup of the department? So is this a clinical teaching? Is this what's the mission of the program, the department, of the school? I know when I was at a Hispanic serving institution, that was in their mission about serving the students there. So maybe looking at how they present themselves and matching that, and any specifics in the job posting. So here, this is for the assistant professor position in the tree ring laboratory at the University of Arizona. And they were looking for a teaching statement sharing their teaching philosophy and or approaches, future teaching and mentoring interests, and ways you might contribute to the goals as a land grant Hispanic serving institution. So that requires you to kind of modify what you have, and they have a 3-page limit. They're asking for a lot. They're also asking for a 3-page limit of a research statement. So it's a lot of reading for the committee. And so to give yourself the best chance, I really believe keeping it short and keeping it focused. So this one's just my thought. Avoid obvious or fluffy statements, and then the caveat is without backing them. So have you ever heard of somebody who's not a student-centered teacher? Like when you say I'm a student-centered teacher, like things like that, like these broad statements, or I like to reach everyone in the classroom. Like if anybody is saying that they don't, like that's an obvious red flag, but most people are going to say positive things about how they are in the classroom, right? But what does that look like? How does that how does that show up? So try, if you find a statement that is like really showing your compassion, that is awesome. But make sure that if somebody asks how, you're answering it in the next line, right? Okay, so then there's this balancing act between confidence and humility. I was just on Twitter a little while ago, and I saw an old colleague who was writing that they are at a Hispanic serving institution, and people kept talking about their students as like deficient of things, or without like that we're serving students, and kept talking about them in a way that was like, it created this power to like dynamic that wasn't ideal. And so students are here to learn, we're here to serve students. And so keeping in mind that that's our role, and having your humility there, but also having the confidence that even though you may not have taught in a traditional setting, or you only taught high school, or you only, like, you did that, and put that on paper, and go out there confidently, because that will come through on the paper. So I was talking earlier about connecting your, I'm gonna move this. Sorry. Okay. Connecting your teaching to your service and your research. Well, another balancing act is not restating exactly what was in your research statement or your diversity statement. Talking about your research is important and your service is important, because it can show and demonstrate how you carry the themes that you're talking about in each one of these through like a common thread. Another thought is, with such a heavy research background, will your students have the opportunity to be involved in your research? Some folks might look and see that they want to be engaged in research, and so this person has a lab and has students and has undergrad students. That's really huge, especially if you're at an undergraduate institution where undergrads are getting involved in research, showing that you're able to mentor there. And then again, what is the result of that? Do you like to prepare students to go on to master's degree programs in X, Y, and Z? Make sure it's concrete. Also consider your mentorship style. So if you only have experience from a research lab and that's your mentoring is your teaching, then expand on that and what your mentorship style is and what it looks like. Do you have meetings one-on-one with your students? And then try to grab from what your research and service might contribute to your teaching. 7 is cite your sources. And this just means that if you're using a philosophy or teaching theory, like, go ahead and tell them what it is. If you feel really strongly about you had a really great educator at one point, you had a teacher, a mentor that really did all of these things and you learned from them, you don't have any formal experience, but you saw them do this, like, go ahead and it doesn't have to be an APA citation, but like, call it out. My 6th grade teacher at this point taught us this and I saw it work, and this is how it goes. It's a lot more fun on the receiving end to read that than just like, I don't know, but I think I'll do this. um it goes a long way. Tip 8 is use I and my statements. This is yours. This is your, like, you take ownership for all of this. It displays confidence. It also allows you to speak to your experiences. You're more likely to have your writing come across like personalized if you're talking about from your own experience, and it reads less like a paper that somebody has to grade and more like a statement. Also comes off less philosophical if you're speaking from your expected perspective and your experience. Number 9, pull it all together, have a conclusion. So I think it's easy to keep writing when we write these statements, like, here's what I do, here's what I hear, here's what I do, here's what I do. But then in the final, come back together, um, have a concluding paragraph, address the future. Like, maybe there's something that you said didn't work for you, and that's totally fine to admit. There have been plenty of things that didn't work for me in the classroom, and I would love to talk about what I learned and grew from. um how are you going to address that in the future? How are you going to be in this role, or how do you hope to be in this role, or what resources does this institution have that you're applying to that you want to use? What about trainings that you want to take? Just show interest in trying to grow your teaching. Yeah, I guess I said. And finally, well, I think I have one more, but make sure it's well written. So write it, then revise again. Get a second set of eyes, which is also get others' opinions. It's a live document. So I have my teaching statement just like I have my CV, just like on my OneDrive all the time. And if something comes up, I'm like throwing it in there. I'm not actively like going out and applying for jobs right now, so it's kind of dormant. But at the time that I was, it was so nice to be able to just change a couple things and go back and modify. It's also your first impression. So unfortunately, on committees, they don't see you. They don't like you're not coming off of the paper, like you're not there. So it's just the paper. And so your first impression is really important. And if this is a piece of personal writing that they're getting from you, one, they're also seeing how your formal writing is or what your academic writing looks like. And two, it's just who you are. So they'll be able to grab a lot from that. So number 11 is just to be yourself, which you kind of talked about. Authenticity is important and having honesty, because if you don't take who you are and put that into your writing statement and then you get hired for the job or you get called out for an interview, I promise you somebody is going to ask you a question you are not waiting for. I remember being on interviewing and somebody pulled something from my CV that happened. It was true, but I forgot. I buried it somewhere in the recesses of my mind. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. So when you have your teaching statement, if somebody finds something really cool and it wasn't true, and then they bring it up, it's gonna be really like awkward, right? So just share your personal experience. The more personal and personable you are, the more likely you are to be memorable. And that's the name of the game when the committee sits down in a room and just has all of these applications that they're going through. So sorry that was kind of quick, but before you write, you want to reflect on your experiences in education. So again, for folks who haven't been at the front of a classroom or a formal teaching role, think about your experiences as a mentor or your experiences as a student or mentee. Like what has worked well and how did somebody approach you? And what was your response? It doesn't just have to be that you were the instructor. What could use improvement? And then finally, what excites you about teaching? So I was gonna have us just kind of take a moment to do a couple prompts. The first is to reflect on your own teaching experiences. What experiences have you had, traditional, or I call it non-traditional, but that's just not standing in front of the classroom. But if anybody feels comfortable, I mean, you can start writing out all the ways that you have been a teacher, but you can also start shouting them out if the is comfort or the chat. There's a high school teacher among us, I know that.
So I have done limited academic in-person teaching. So I can speak to that, but I've also done a lot more teaching out in the community. I work with a nonprofit and I teach the science behind yoga and stress. And so I hadn't thought about bringing that in, but I'm essentially doing the same thing, communicating science and teaching. So,
And even if you're not communicating science, like you're still connecting with people, right? And so it's bringing everyone along, doing all the student centered stuff, like all those statements that we make, broader statements, like you could see that in what you're doing. So finding a way to then bring that into a paragraph form of this is what I did and this is how it went, and examples. Anybody else? Yeah, okay.
So I'm originally from Brazil, so I did some teaching in Brazil. And one of the meaningful experiences for me was teaching at a school for aircraft mechanics. And it was their target audience were people that have already worked for some time in their life. So they're usually kind of older, maybe 40s, 50s. But it also had very young people together. And I thought that was kind of a very interesting experience for me to have a class with mixed ages. It taught me a lot, and it was it was kind of a balancing act because when your language has to change as you're talking to one group or the other. So I think those experiences when I don't know if that would go into non-traditional, but I think those are very useful if you have an opportunity to do different kinds of teaching than what you're going to be applying for.
definitely. Was there anything that changed in how you taught throughout that semester that you found to be more successful, or but in any semester?
Um, it was kind of an epiphany in a way because I came into class. I taught for a year. I taught like 3 groups, and because I had ideas of how to teach people, and 99% of those probably didn't work.
Yeah.
So I had to rethink a lot of stuff. I would go back home feeling pretty bad that the class didn't go well, and then I would try and change things and fix the way I was talking and presenting things because I got a lot of blank stares
Yep.
when teaching that class. So it was humbling experience, and it makes you go after new ideas. That's what it did for me.
Awesome. So right there, like that story paragraph of your teaching statement, right? I mean, you could talk about the situation and the challenge, and I would get into more specific examples about I tried this and this didn't work and I tried this. But just being able to see, like, I take it that you're student centered and you're passionate about teaching, and you didn't say either one of those phrases once, you know? So you gave us an example of exactly how that worked. Is there anybody else wants to share? Okay. Thank you for sharing. Um, Here's the second prompt is what teaching strategy have sorry, grammar. What teaching strategy have you used to achieve a specific example or like objective, and how was it received and what was the feedback? Okay.
So my background in teaching is kind of diverse. I've got lots of different types of teaching, but most recently, probably in the anatomy lab, teaching gross anatomy and on cadavers. It's sometimes hard for a large group to gather around and see exactly what you're looking at, right? And so I have a little bit of background in film and production as well. So being able to like capture some of that and provide it to my students before class, let them see it, and then come and help almost divide them up into groups and let them teach each other based off what they saw in the video, and then get hands on when they got to the class, and then we could pull together and go through stuff after. So it kind of put a responsibility on them in the first place. Then they were able to use some group stuff and then all together at the end. So that worked pretty well for us.
Yeah. I, that's awesome, first of all. This one thing I thought is like you brought in like technology, you brought in your own background, and it all came together for something that was beneficial to the student. So I'm only saying this because y'all, like, on the first mentee, it kind of sounded like nobody, like there was not a whole lot of experience in writing it, but I think it's kind of like writing itself if you stop and think about what these experiences are. I don't have a background in film. If I read somebody that was filming all this stuff, like when I got here and we were filming every single classroom and all the camera setup, like that's a huge that puts you up above a lot of other applicants or folks who are vying for these jobs. So thinking about stuff like that, I know sometimes it's digging down into things that maybe you hadn't thought, but this is where that self-reflection, just writing down all of some of, or not all of, some of your experiences or some of the challenges or the big wins is huge. Yeah.
So I had this experience. I teach a class on artificial intelligence or machine learning, call it that way. Um, the, uh, the the basic statistics behind that. And for a class that was a mix of computer science students and biology students. So some of them had really good backgrounds, some others didn't have it. So I had a couple of classes and I prepared them in a way that was easy for students to grasp the ideas. And I had some people supervising my class as well. And it was very interesting. I got feedback from the students that was, your class was awesome. I got so much of it and said, okay, that's great. And then supervisor said, you know what? I thought it was not deep enough. So maybe you could change that. I changed that for the next class and it was amazing. The students, they all said, Daniel, everything went over my head. I couldn't get anything. And the supervisor, they said, Daniel, this was awesome. So I said, well, how do I do this then?
Right. Welcome to academia, right? Yeah. Um, I don't- yeah. When you get the answer to that, you come back and let me know because it's the same thing. Um, but there is something else still there that came from your experience that if you could write about it in a concise way, but really talk about what you learned or what your students learned and the feedback. Like I think it's so important to talk about what doesn't work. In research, we never report null findings, like or negative findings, but here we are. Maybe you report it and that's awesome. I don't. Um, my dissertation still is waiting somewhere to get published. But yeah, I think it's like it's starting to just come together. I hope you're feeling like you're seeing it, kind of the pieces existing there.
I
Um,
I really am passionate about science communication, and so I always have an extra credit assignment. And I've been teaching a nutrition course, and so I ask my students to debunk some nutrition misinformation they find in social media. And I think it's been a really great strategy to use because it's providing them real world examples. It's allowing them to apply the information they've learned and then tell that to folks that maybe don't have access to the knowledge that they're getting. And for one of them, in fact, they said like, "Wow, this is actually something I want to do." Like continuously, and so that was a fun experience to see that they, like, really got something out of that project.
that's awesome. Everybody on TikTok is a nutritionist, so that's helpful. Yeah. Um, I graduated in 2020, so I'll say my teaching statement when I was applying on the job market in 2019. Whew, I thought I was going to change the world. I was going to be the best teacher ever. And then I started my job in August and it was blank screens, like 48 blank screens Monday morning at 8 a.m. And that really taught me like what I thought reality was way different. And so I think we've all kind of had those moments where like this is gonna be awesome. And the experiment that you like the lab day that like you bring in donuts and you bring in all this stuff so you can measure glucose and everybody's like vegan or like all this stuff and you're like, okay, that gluten free I guess would be the one, but didn't really go the way I wanted it to. So but I think that honesty and like that humility is what comes across in your teaching statement. I will tell you, like personally, when we read the research statements, like they're very direct, right? If there's a teaching statement that is a little bit more like not stream of consciousness, please, but like personable, it's gonna be what sticks out. So in the end, this is your opportunity to show who you are as an educator. So let your passion come through. If you have that, like just asking a few questions. Everybody's got these stories that show some big wins in the classroom and like in yourself. It provides a writing sample, so just make sure it's clean. And it gives the committee a bit more about who you are, and you can come off the page a little bit more than maybe on your research statement. Not, and I'm not knocking research at all. Or your research statement, that just has to be a little bit more direct by nature in what you're proposing. I think. So yeah, that is all I have. So I really appreciate the engagement. I have way early, so plenty of times for questions if you have any. Or oh, yeah. Mhm.
Um, is there, if you go online and you look for examples and things of teaching
Yeah.
statements, some people give you like a recipe oh, you should do this first, and then you should talk about this, and then this. Is this something that committees kind of appreciate? An easier way of reading, like when you're writing a grant, and you have a specific way of putting things and highlighting specific words and paragraphs. Is that a good way that committees
You mean
look at?
like bolding and underlining and things?
Bolding, underlining, or you talk about something specific in the introduction, and you expect the next paragraph to show you a personal example, and then the conclusion is going to mention the how you align with the institution. Is that something that committees expect to read in the teaching statement? A formula?
I wouldn't say expect it. That's kind of my suggestion for reading them, but my biggest, I think the recipe is to introduce yourself, and then just make sure that if you only talk about one strategy, like that there's plenty of examples, and then in the end tying it back. But if you are, I don't think, I've never read a teaching statement with somebody else. I just have come back together and said, this, I really liked we all really liked this one. And normally it was just somebody, um, good writing and good strategies. So if you have those, then I think you're fine. I don't know if that exactly answered it.
Yeah, no, I guess my question wasn't very pointed anyway.
No, yeah. The recipe is kind of what you make it, as long as you're hitting on showing them that you have actually done this and can do this.
So maybe like less structure than what grant applications are, where it's like you need this heading, this subheading,
Yeah.
this exact detail, and you have a little bit more freedom.
Because, if I may just build on top of that, because you mentioned that committees will have a lot of things they have to read.
Mhm.
So you want yours to kind of stick out and be different. And from your talk, I get that one of the things that you do is make it easy to read.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely easy to read. So don't try to make the margins really small and the font really small to fit more. Um it, like, empty space is fine, or like if you have a quote from a student of what they said on a teaching evaluation that has driven something that you've done, it's fine to put that in there. Um or a visual, or some sort of example. I think that's fine. Again, all my opinion, but um I've seen folks even add, some places will ask for a teaching effectiveness. And so I have a document that I pull selectively each year, quotes from my teaching evaluations. And the reason I say selective is, like, I'd get stuff like, this class should have been in person, and it was in person, they just never came. And so, like, if I took everything, it's not a good use of space. So taking a positive and a negative comment and just putting them and having that as another page. If you have 2 pages but you only write 1 page, having that kind of be like, I taught this class and here are my ratings, and here are some comments that came from that class. Like, that could be another way to break it up and give them something.
Okay, that's interesting. That's something I'd never
Yeah.
heard about adding to a teaching statement. So that's useful.
Yeah. Everybody loves numbers, so yeah, data.
I was wondering if you have well, I know you've already mentioned some at the beginning of your slides where you had some resources. Do any of those kind of like point oh
Yeah.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was just gonna say, I was like, I don't have like any kind of formal like this is how you teach, but I assume there are theories and there are like names for those strategies, and
Yeah.
I probably use them and I just don't know the name.
Yeah.
And I would probably come off more, professional if I actually knew what the name of that strategy was. So I was like, oh, I wonder if there's some kind of like nice resource that kind of summarizes teaching approaches, or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that you can see like if you're already doing the things, right? I don't
Yeah.
know.
So there's teaching, like, there's the global teaching philosophies, and there's like humanism, constructivist. Those are the two that I like more closely aligned with, so I forget all the rest. But that's like, humanism is like, everybody's human, we're kind of on the same plate, like same area, we're going through it together. And then constructivist is like, I'm giving you the information, you're constructing what you need from it. so there's things like that that I'm sure you're doing. So I don't have anything here, but I'd be happy to follow up with kind of some more resources about what that is. Philosophy though, once you kind of go down this rabbit hole, I think as long as you can mention it, but come back to how it works instead of like, this is what it looks like and this is what, because everybody can Google constructivist teaching, right? Like, but how does that look for you? And I don't want you to gaslight yourself into not believing that you're doing it just because you don't know the names. We do enough of that. And yeah.
Did you say that you've sat on committees before?
Yeah.
So, before I ask my question, I do need a preference. I feel like that professors should be able to teach well in systems. Um, in all honesty, like at R1 institutions like this, how much does a teaching statement make or break an applicant? Because like when I was an undergrad and a grad student, the joke always was like if you sat through a really bad class for a semester, it was like, okay, these professors are here for the research and not to be teachers. So I was just kind of curious, like, from since you've been on the other side of it, has it actually like really helped applicants out to have
Okay.
a strong teaching statement?
Yeah. I will say I when I was writing this, I was like, this is all utopian. Like this isn't a perfect world and this is like perfect people. So like I recognize that. So I really appreciate your question. I have served on a teaching, like a hiring committee at a community college that also had the teaching component, R1, but clinical. Like since I'm a clinical degree, I like have all been clinicians, and so teaching was a huge focus. If I'm also clinical faculty, so teaching is 60% of what my load is, and so um I've been asked to serve on teaching, predominantly teaching sides of things. So it is pretty big. I'll also say on my interview here, they didn't have me do a research talk. They had me do a teaching service and research talk all together. So yeah, it was like just talk about yourself basically, but also talk about hit all these things. So I think it kind of depends on the place that you are looking. And I think reading between the lines of job postings, like if you just get familiar with higher ed jobs, I spent years on higher ed jobs, just like stalking them all and seeing what they are. And it kind of starts to come through how much this is gonna weigh or what they're looking for. But I think if you have a strong teaching statement that you're just sitting on and you change it a little bit, you'll be safe on both ends. But yeah, I think they are important if that's the mission of the school and or like the place that you're applying. That'll come through on an interview. Like if you want to be in teaching, that will come through on an interview if that's what's important to them or not, and help you make your decision. Yeah. Other questions? I'm gonna go back to that really quick. Sorry, because like mentorship is so important in the research space. And so being able to demonstrate that you are a positive, helpful mentor on that end is also really important. So yeah, don't want that to be lost too. Hopefully people are looking for that. Maybe not. Anything else? Okay, well, thanks so much.
Yeah, join me in thanking Carolina for this excellent presentation.
Thanks.
Uh, we will start at the top of the hour, so we have a quick little break here, and we'll be back.
Which is yeah, and like before you go to college, you're like taught right? And then like research lab, yeah, like curtains